Think about 1 week from a childhood summer. Not the whole summer, just 1 week. It probably feels like it lasted forever. Morning to night felt like its own small lifetime. Now think about last week. Any random week from the last few years. Chances are you can barely find it. It's gone, folded into a blur of other weeks that all look the same. Same 7 days both times. Same 24 hours each. So why did 1 week last forever and the other one basically didn't happen at all? This isn't nostalgia playing tricks on you. Ask almost anyone over 30 and you'll hear the same thing. Childhood summers felt endless. Adult years disappear. Scientists have been trying to explain this for well over a century, and it turns out there isn't one single answer. There are several, and they stack on top of each other, which raises the real question. Physics says time itself isn't speeding up. So what, inside you, is? In 2007, a neuroscientist named David Eagleman wanted to test something people say all the time, that in a genuine emergency, time slows down. So he built a device, a small display worn on the wrist, flashing numbers faster than the human eye can normally read. Then he took 20 volunteers to a 31-meter drop tower in Dallas and let them fall backward into a net, in complete freefall, for 2.49 seconds. If fear really does slow down perception, the volunteers should have been able to read that flickering display during the fall, numbers that were unreadable standing still on the ground. They couldn't. Not one of them read it any better while falling than while standing on solid ground. But here's the part that matters. Afterward, when asked to estimate how long the fall had felt, people didn't say 2.49 seconds. On average, they remembered it as 36% longer than it actually was. Time hadn't slowed down. Their memory of it had simply grown thicker. That thickness is a real clue, and we'll come back to it. But there's an older, simpler explanation first, one written down in 1877 by a philosopher named Paul Janet. His idea: you don't experience time in seconds, you experience it as a fraction of your life so far. To a 5-year-old, 1 year is 20% of everything they've ever lived. It's enormous. To a 50-year-old, that same year is 2%. It barely registers. Under that math, the 5 years between your 5th and 10th birthday should feel roughly as long, subjectively, as the 40 years between your 40th and 80th. Every year gets smaller simply because the ruler you're measuring it against keeps getting longer. It's tidy, and it lines up with something almost everyone has actually felt. A single afternoon at age 4 can sit in memory with the same weight as an entire weekend at 40. Not because the afternoon mattered more, but because, at 4, that afternoon was a much bigger slice of the only life you had so far. It's also not the whole story, because it doesn't explain why some weeks, even as an adult, still feel long. A first trip to a new country, a first week at a new job, those don't shrink the way ordinary weeks do, no matter how old you are. This is where Eagleman's real theory comes in, and it goes back even further to the psychologist William James in 1890. James noticed that a life full of unfamiliar experiences feels long in memory, while a life that's monotonous, even if it's busy, collapses into almost nothing once it's over. Here's why. When your brain encounters something new, it has to work harder. It builds a denser, more detailed memory to make sure it doesn't miss anything important. A familiar routine barely gets recorded at all because your brain already decided it doesn't need the details twice. Childhood is relentlessly new. First bike, first school, first heartbreak, first everything. Every week gets logged in detail, which is also, not by coincidence, why most people's strongest, most specific memories cluster somewhere between the ages of about 10 and 30. Psychologists call it the reminiscence bump. It's simply the last long stretch of life where almost everything was still new. There's a strange wrinkle in all of this, something the researcher Claudia Hammond named the holiday paradox. Think about the best trip you've taken recently. While you were living it, the days probably felt rushed, too short. You blinked and you were already packing to go home. But ask yourself how long ago that trip feels now. A week that objectively lasted 7 days often feels, in memory, like it stretched out far longer than an ordinary week back home ever does. That's the paradox. Time in the moment and time in memory aren't running on the same clock. They can move in completely opposite directions at once. While you're inside a new experience, your attention gets pulled outward, toward everything unfamiliar in front of you. So the moment-to-moment sense of time speeds up. It's only afterward, once your brain has to store what happened, that all those densely packed new memories stretch the trip back out again. Which means the two things people usually lump together, time feeling fast right now and a period feeling short later, aren't actually the same complaint. You can have one without the other. And the one that decides what a whole decade will feel like when you look back on it from old age is the second one. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. In 2005, two researchers in Germany, Mark Whitman and Sandra Lenhoff, asked 499 people, ages 14 to 94, how fast time felt like it was passing for them. Age did predict the answer. Older people really did report time moving faster, on average. But age only explained about 10% of the difference between people. 90% of it was something else entirely, which means the real culprit was never your age. It's routine. Picture two people, both exactly 45 years old. One of them has driven the same commute, eaten the same 3 meals, had the same conversations for the last 10 years. The other spent that decade moving to new cities, learning a new instrument, ending one career and starting another. Ask them both how the last 10 years felt. The first person will tell you it went by in a flash, barely worth mentioning. The second will swear it felt like 2 lifetimes, same 10 years, same aging body, same slowing metabolism that some researchers also point to as a smaller piece of this puzzle. None of that explains the gap between those two people. Only one thing does. How much of that decade was actually new? None of this means you need a new city or a new career every year. Most people can't live like that, and most people wouldn't want to. The brain doesn't need an entirely new life to register something as new. A different route to work. A conversation with a stranger instead of a scroll through your phone. Small enough to actually keep, large enough for your brain to bother filing it away. Which is the uncomfortable part. Time isn't just passing you by. You are, in a very real sense, quietly choosing how much of it you'll remember, one routine choice at a time. Every year you let become a repeat of the year before gets compressed down to almost nothing in your memory, even while you're living through all 365 days of it in real time. And every year you deliberately fill with something unfamiliar, a new place, a new skill, a new person, gets stored at something closer to full resolution. Decades from now, that's the year that will still feel like it actually happened. This isn't really about slowing time down. Nobody can do that. It's about whether the life you're living right now leaves anything behind worth remembering. So the next time a year feels like it disappeared without you noticing, that's not proof you're getting older. It's a sign that year didn't ask anything new of you. The 5-year-old at the birthday party isn't experiencing more time than you are. She's just experiencing more of it for the first time. You can still have that. Not more hours in the day, more days that actually leave a mark. If you can remember exactly what you were doing on some random Tuesday from years ago, tell me what made that one stick. I'm curious what it was for you.